please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the April 13th, 2022 meeting?
So moved.
Second. With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, quick statement. I always say quick statement, and sometimes it's not quick, I know that, but I'm going to try to make it quick. I was driving in this morning and thinking about that it's already May 4th. It's hard to believe the next time we'll meet as a board, our schools will be out for the summer. We'll probably already be kicking into the summer learning time period where, of course, you know, as a state, we've deployed millions of dollars to support summer learning opportunities throughout the state, many in partnership with various community organizations and partners. But in the last month, the last push, this is an active time for our schools. Of course, we're gearing up for graduation, honors, days, so many prom pictures filling our social media feeds. I don't know about you, but it's an exciting time of year for sure for our schools. On that note, also want to make sure top of mind, it is Teacher Appreciation Week. And we are so very thankful for our 63,000 Indiana teachers who serve our 1.12 million Indiana students every single day. We're so thankful for you. We thank you every day. But this week especially, I hope that you are getting just spoiled with treats and food and celebrations and thank yous because, man, you sure do deserve it. We thank you. Couple board members I want to call out really quick, and they are avoiding eye contact. I always love when this happens. Like, come on. Greg Gastineau was just named Hamilton Southeastern, I almost said Hamilton County, Hamilton Southeastern High School Teacher of the Year. So our own Mr. Gastineau, Teacher of the Year. I told him I was going to say a lot and then pass it to him, and he immediately was on the prep call, was like uncomfortable, like don't do that, don't do that. But I have been in your classroom, and it is no doubt interactive, engaging, and those students are so fortunate to have you, Mr. Gastineau. Do you want to say anything?
Sure. It was overwhelming because I just think we have such an incredible staff at Hamilton Southeast, over 200 teachers. I think of Mr. Yantz. Who did he teach you?
No, but I've had a lot of time with Mr. Yance.
And he's phenomenal. He's been a Hoosier educator for over 40 years.
Yep.
And just what all teachers have gone through in the last 2 years, there's so much to celebrate as we're getting on the backside, and kids are just so excited to be back in school again. So it meant a great deal for me professionally and personally.
Very good. Well, we're proud of you. And Kristen Wrenchler, she has won multiple awards over the years in her history teaching and what she does for kids. A 9th grade social studies teacher, history teacher in Columbia City. So I'll give you the same opportunity. Do you want to say any words as teacher on our State Board of Education?
Well, you didn't warn me ahead of time.
I didn't. I did
Like
not
Greg.
warn you. I did not warn you. I warned Greg.
I'll just reiterate what Greg said, that it's been great to be back in person and to start to have a sense of normalcy and to be able to build community with our students again while seeing their faces. So though it's been a tough year, it's been a good year. It's been great to be back with our kids in person and to start to feel normal again. So teachers across the state have been working their tails off to try to bring kids back up to the standards that we need to, and it's great to have a week to just recognize all teachers. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll invite, if any other board member wants to say anything on Teacher Appreciation Day, you're welcome to. No pressure.
Katie, I will,
Yeah.
just because I wouldn't have, other than just in my real world job, I've been doing a bunch of focus groups with students lately for an organization, and it is overwhelming. Even had kids in tears yesterday as we were asking questions like, what's your favorite thing at school? Well, it's my teachers. And then they'd have teachers that they would talk about, and then they'd be like, it's the relationships with those teachers and what have you. So I think sometimes we forget, us in this room don't forget this, but I think others forget the power that a teacher has. And then when you ask questions like, what's your biggest fear? Well, what if we have to go back to being virtual and I can't be with my teacher? You know, and those are things that, and that's very real. And so the last 3 or 4 days, as I've spent with hundreds of students, that's been an overwhelming piece. And I think on Teacher Appreciation Week that it's important to call that out, that teachers, whether you think you do at the end, and I know how that is, because I had lots of ends of the day where it's like, did I do anything good today, right? But you do every single day,
Yes.
whether you know it or not.
Yes. Well said. Thank you, Dr. Ernest. All right. Couple other announcements for the board. Just a couple weeks ago, we launched the new Indiana Employability Skills Innovation and Implementation Grant. That is totally designed in support of our Indiana GPS and the characteristics and what we've talked about as a board. You know, yes, it is incredibly important that we're developing knowledge, and we're hearing over and over the value of skill development. We have these employability skills standards in Indiana, but how do we know if we're making progress? So this grant seeks to find and identify some pilot schools and school corporations who are willing to lean in with us as we explore how we might measure skills. The other grant that was just launched, I think I mentioned last month, is the Explore, Engage, and Experience grant, which is also in complements to Indiana GPS to expand students' access to pathways and opportunities. We also provided a couple weeks back, a week back, time flies, it seems like, the guidance based on the new law, the 3 e-learning days, if you can remember that law that passed towards the end of session. That guidance is out on new virtual instructional days based on the law. Schools can meet the 180-day instructional day requirement through in-person instruction and virtual student instruction days that are at least 50% synchronous per the law, and can request waivers for extraordinary circumstances. Of course, as a board, we may see some additional 1003 waivers because of the flexibility that the 1003 waiver provides. Today, we're going to be hearing a couple of presentations, and I'll introduce those folks right before they present. But again, the update on the Indiana GPS and that spring update before our fall launch, and then also our Indiana standards and essential need of support, our essential standards. We're going to update you on that as well. So at this time, let's move forward, and I'll ask if any other board members have comments. Please feel welcome to share. Yes, sir, BJ.
Just a congratulations. I know that there were several referendums on the board yesterday, or on the ballot yesterday, but I know that our colleague to my right here,
Did you win, Pat?
Yes, we did.
And that's a testament to the work that they do in Perry Township.
doubt.
As someone who's ran campaigns and won and lost them, but on both sides of that, congratulations to those students and all those places that are doing great work.
Yes, thank you, good shout out.
Yeah.
Any other board member comments? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
And actually, do you know what I just did? Let me approve the consent agenda, and then I'm gonna circle back to public comments. Actually, well, Robert's Rules of Orders, I probably need to continue, don't I?
You can do either way. You're fine.
I rescind
You-
my motion.
Okay, thank you for rescinding your motion. Let's go ahead and move to public comment. I have a couple up here. One is a comment in general comments, and the other will come right before Indiana GPS. So for general comments, we have John O'Neill with ISTA. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Jenner and board members. John O'Neill at the Indiana State Teachers Association. First of all, congrats to the teachers here for their awards. And on behalf of ISTA, just want to thank all our educators statewide. I just will have a brief comment about the dashboard, and I'm going to read from my phone because our printers malfunctioned this morning. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for state board and department staff for continuing to reach out and meet with our members and us as staff to have input on this process. And my comments today, we've had a lot of discussion over the last year on this since the law passed that we supported. I'm going to try to just keep it to a few technical types of things based on the kind of the presentation of how this is going to look. We have some policy issues. Some of these issues, you've probably heard. We just want to reiterate them moving forward. We do have several recommendations as this implementation takes place. For longitudinal data, we believe that school dashboards at the local level should include growth so that all students can demonstrate improvement regardless of their starting point. We believe that any comparisons available on the local dashboard piece, for example, district to district, school to district, or district to state comparisons, should present information clearly and fairly so that they can be compared with other like schools based on the data composition to paint an accurate picture. We believe that all data presented in the dashboard should be clearly defined, accurate, and user-friendly, so parents and other stakeholders can fully understand the characteristics of each school district. ISTA continues to advocate for multiple measures at the local level, which we have seen some of this incorporated into the dashboard at this point. Some things we would like to see at those local options are things like class size, teacher retention rates, salary information, and various resources and supports available within each district. We will say that our association continues to oppose the postgraduate outcomes that tie schools to numerous decisions and factors students make outside of the control of schools after they depart. And we've been adamant about that from the beginning. We know that this is part of the dashboard. We hope that eventually the General Assembly moves away from A to F and some of these more things tied to consequences. And then finally, we continue to oppose the over-reliance on standardized test scores, understanding that you as a board are tied by legislative hands, but that's another issue that we continue to work on to reduce the reliance on standardized tests. So in conclusion, just thank you all again, Dr. Jenner and board members, state board staff. I've seen a few of them here today that met with us this week. And we continue to look forward to meetings and discussions about this as implementation occurs, and completely available to answer any questions or offer input and information. So
Thank
again,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. At this time, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I will be recusing from consent agenda specifically for Part C.
Dr. Ernest, Part C. Any other
I will be
recusals?
recusing from consent agenda B.
BJ Watts, B. Any other recusals? And any on the phone? I want to make sure I give you wait time from Ms. Delosa or Ms. Moats.
I see heads nodding.
Okay, thank you. So I heard a motion. Did we capture a second? With a motion and a second, consent agenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, new business. We're moving straight to discussion today. So discussion, we have another comment, public comment, right before discussion item 1. So Todd Best from Indiana Principals Association, if you could come on up.
Good morning, Dr. Jenner and members of the State Board.
Morning.
Thank you for giving us a brief time to make some comments today. And again, regarding the development of the Indiana GPS dashboard, having now been at IASP for 12 years and seeing several versions of accountability systems come to the field, I can say that our members really appreciate that the DOE has involved educators from multiple school settings and types in that process. The DOE, and here today, and I know in the room, Dr. Jenner, Jason Callahan, Ron Sandlin, Brian Murphy, and of course many others within the Department of Ed, have been willing to take suggestions as to the actual metrics and their potential target goals, and then also the design of how that data will look to educators and then maybe to the families and communities so they can be most informed. I've said throughout that the GPS development, that this system offers a rich way to engage the community and data that's real to them. Even when the data may indicate a growth area for a school or corporation, especially at the elementary level. Literacy, we know, is a key factor. As we've seen in the last year or so, schools and partners can engage to support students through that General Assembly, that was their intention with the $150 million grant program in the 2021 General Assembly. At the middle school level, advanced coursework represents opportunity for students. The key here is that schools and communities see this piece of information as just that, not a grade of how the school is doing. In this case, with that advanced coursework, we want kids to strive to improve in those areas without artificially having students in coursework that they're not ready for. The why and how are the conversations to have between the school and the community. At the high school level, we've always had multiple indicators, and we've always been thankful for that. I know our elementary and middle school levels appreciate this development. I'll point to the strength of diploma indicator in my time today. This again generates the right conversations around what's important for students, locally, statewide, and of course, globally. This can help us to also know at best any inequities that are present for our subgroups of students with regard to their diplomas, be it special ed, SES, race, or ethnicity. And to a degree, postgraduate data can also shed light on what's going on in the community and what's necessary for potential improvements and supports that they can bring to bear. Thank you for listening today. We know this is hard work for the DOE and for you on the state board in the coming months, and appreciate that the Indiana GPS system allows our schools and communities to move beyond thinking of accountability beyond a single score or letter. It generates thoughts of how do we work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Best. Appreciate your time today and your thoughts. So on that note, if we could have Mr. Ron Sandlin, the department's Senior Director of Performance and Transformation, come up. If we could show the Indiana GPS presentation on the screen, great.
Thank you, Dr. Jenner and members of the board. Going to spend today to do a brief overview. We committed to do a spring update back in December, and so that is what we're bringing to you today, which is specifically focused on the business rules. So we've done the hard work of identifying what's important. Now we're grappling with the very technical work of figuring out how to actually measure those and report out data to ensure that it does exactly what Mr. Best shares, really catalyzes conversations across our state. So I'll do a quick introduction of the process for explaining the indicators and quickly level set as well. I'm only going to highlight some of the business rules for specific indicators during the meeting today, but included in this presentation that is both available to you and publicly are links to a table that include all of the business rules to date. And then finally, Dr. Jenner highlighted some of the great work going on at the department with led by a lot of my peers and colleagues. I'll highlight how those initiatives are helping also drive the work of GPS. I think I lost my clicker, Brian. All right, I'm back on. All right, so starting out, I want to ground us as a quick level set of our guiding principles, and we've had these in place since the beginning of the process. It was one of the very first steps we took to say, what is the universe of thought processes, of principles that we are going to ground all of these very challenging and complex decisions in? 2 of the 4 have really, really stuck out throughout this business rule process that I'll highlight specifically, but you see all 4 on the screen. The first is this idea of developing metrics and indicators that constantly encourage students to be on a pathway towards employment, enlistment, enrollment. So how are we making sure that we're structuring our indicators to continue to push and foster those conversations for Hoosier students? The other one is this concept of transparency and nimbleness. We've said from the beginning that GPS represents a paradigm shift when it comes to school performance and accountability. And we've really focused on prioritizing the need for transparency so that we can have all of the conversations. We can celebrate the successes, and we can also bring the community together to discuss the opportunities we have to better serve all students. Again, all 4 inform every decision. Those 2 have really stuck out, and I'll probably continue to reference back to them as I explain the business rules moving forward. So to quickly highlight, none of the indicators have changed since December. So these are the same exact indicators that we presented and you approved in December for both K-8 and high school. But one important reminder as we dig into the business rules is bringing this concept up of the currently existing indicators and the aspirational indicators. Dr. Jenner has really leaned in on the leadership here to say, listen, if we don't put our stake in the sand and say we are measuring these things, even if we don't know exactly how we're going to do it, we are constantly going to kick the can and not get there. We've taken the bold step through Dr. Jenner's leadership to put that stake in the sand and say, no, we are not going to kick the can any longer. However, we have given ourselves a little runway on these aspirational indicators. So when we look at the table, you will see some blank boxes that say in development, but it's very important to note that this means we are still on track. These are those bold stakes in the sand, if you will, that we have placed to say by this date, we will figure out as a state of Indiana how to measure and report data to inform those local conversations. Today, though, we do have business rules, for all of the indicators that we anticipate being on the September launch of the GPS dashboard. So the big point here is we are still on track, and the reminder of these aspirational indicators is just to make sure that when you see those boxes that say in development, it's because we just don't have the data yet. But we remain committed to getting those data over the next couple years. And next, I will briefly go through the process before we dig into the specific business rules. This entire GPS process, I am most proud, and again, I stand on the shoulder of giants up here. I work in this project with countless people at the department and external support folks, but I am most proud at just the opportunities we have provided for engagement into this process. You heard from 2 organizations that have been vital to our work so far, ISTA and IASP, who have both provided input from their members to inform this process throughout, and that input continues to inform the work around business rules. In addition to this input, we've really grounded our work in a literature review of national research, even international research in some instances, to ensure that the work that we're doing here in Indiana is building upon the lessons learned from around the country, around the state, and around the world. But we're not being dictated by that research, because we know that research is conducted in certain contexts, and those contexts might not always apply to our communities and our context here in Indiana. So we take that research and we run it against what does Indiana data say? And we pull those two pieces of information together to make the most informed, science-based, if you will, research-based decision as possible that's going to meet the needs and drive the conversations that we want to drive here in Indiana. Next, we then took each indicator based on the research, aligned it to our principles and transparency, promoting college and career readiness, and those employment, enlistment, enrollment, and then made sure that we're aligned across the department and across agencies. We are committed, because one of the goals of GPS is to blur those lines to make sure that all students are completing high school with a clear plan and credentials of currency. We want to make sure that the way we're measuring and communicating about certain indicators is the same way that DWD is the same way that CHE is. So it's critical that we have those conversations as well. And finally, once we ensured that we were aligned and grounded in research and aligned to our principles, we would run some data to ensure that we could actually calculate this, that we could get a valid and reliable number. We haven't run impact data at scale yet. We've only simply run data through the system to make sure that all of the business rules that we've identified are calculable, if you will. So with that high-level level set, we'll dig into 3 K-8 indicators that I wanted to highlight for you all and the field at large. The first one is the third grade literacy indicator. It might have been assumed by a lot of folks that iRead 3 would be the assessment we use to measure this indicator. That decision had not been made up until this point. After a comprehensive review of the available data at the department, it was determined that iRead 3 would be our best assessment to measure and report out the status of third grade literacy across our state. Another important decision point about this business rule is we are using the best score through the summer retest window. Now, when we talk about transparency and we talk about the conversations we want to foster with our schools, one of those really important conversations is how well the schools support students who are struggling to help them get over that really important hurdle of third grade literacy. By reporting out the best score after the summer, it really empowers the school to show their best number and then celebrate and talk about all the supports they put in place for those students who might have struggled during the spring assessment to get over the hurdle by the end of the summer. So prioritizing transparency as also fostering the correct conversation in our communities and building the correct partnerships was why we decided to go with the best test score. As you know, we've had some schools opt into a second grade assessment pilot. For the students who pass in second grade, their scores will be banked until they are third graders, and then they will just be included in the indicator at that point, because the denominator there is third grade students. Next, student attendance. This applies both K-8 and 9-12. This is the percent of individual students who are attending school 94% of the time or more. This is not an overall attendance rate. This is the percent of students who are attending 94% or more. What this does is it insulates this indicator from individual students who might have big challenges attending school and have really low attendance rates. Those students can sometimes disproportionately impact a school's overall attendance rate because their attendance is so low, below 50 in some instances. By calculating this at the individual student level, it does two things. It focuses on the student, it's student-centered, which is one of our principles, and it also ensures that this indicator is transparent about what matters, which is we know when individual students attend over 94% of the time, they score, based on Indiana's data, better, if you will, on those overall state assessments, and we're excited to see how that impacts these other indicators that we are now measuring. Many of you might know the national research is centered around chronic absenteeism, which is 15 days. If you do that math on 180 days, you end up about 91, 92% of the time. Please don't challenge my math. We decided on 94% after reviewing Hoosier data. So we analyzed iLearn and iStep data longitudinally, and we were able to see that there is a linear decline in performance, but there's a significant drop at that 94% mark when we compare student attendance, individual student attendance, to their achievement on those assessment scores. We also recognize that that's one indicator, one analysis to inform this initial benchmark. As we move forward, we are nimble. We will continue to review whether 94% is a meaningful benchmark for all of the other indicators and can revisit this in the future with you all by conducting that analysis of Hoosier data as we move forward. And finally, Mr. Best talked about this during his public comment, advanced coursework prior to grade 9. We believe this indicator is critical to the overall success of the vision that GPS lays out. This indicator helps encourage access and opportunities for more students to complete high school credit-bearing coursework while they're in middle school. The goal here is to create more flexibility in their high school schedule so that they can pursue rigorous work-based learning or take those next level programs of study courses and fit them into their schedule. It is critically important here, though, to point out that this indicator is simply about having conversations about expanding access and opportunity. There is no expectation that all students across the state of Indiana are taking advanced coursework in middle school. And this is why. The national research has showed us, especially around Algebra 1, that when we encourage and push students into courses that they are not prepared for, the actual impact is the lowering of rigor to meet the needs of the students. If we lower the rigor of these advanced courses, we are not preparing students for those pathways to employment, enlistment, enrollment. So as we report these data, as we help and support the conversations, know that the department is committed to pushing this conversation around access and opportunity, and not necessarily an expectation for all. And that's really, really important, and that's one of the paradigm shifts around A to F accountability and this concept around transparency. Because we can have conversations about what the numbers say and what the numbers show about our community, and then we can talk about whether or not we think that is a appropriate or defensible benchmark, and we can also set our own local targets and our own local goals of what is appropriate for our students in our community. What we don't want is the system to restrict access to kids who are prepared, and that's why this conversation is so critical. And one other point I'll make on this is that it's any high school credit-bearing course, not necessarily specific courses. So this ensures that whatever pathway a student is on, if they're taking high school credit-bearing coursework, they are receiving a positive flag for this particular indicator, as opposed to just selecting Algebra 1 or just selecting bio. We've kept it broad to ensure that it encourages all pathways. So I'll pause there for any comments before we jump to 912, if that's okay.
Questions more than comments, I guess.
Yep.
So as I look at this page, Ron, the light blue that you showed us that's been approved as far as the, K to 8 approved headline indicators. Is it okay to assume this, that as we look at the dashboard, we are going to have on that page the results of the statewide testing with growth information as well on that dashboard?
Yes. The ELA and math, student proficiency and growth, was actually added, I think, for this exact reason.
Yeah.
We will, on the headline page, show growth data and proficiency data.
Okay, and then attendance will be there, and then this employability is the aspirational things down the road.
Yes, sir.
But the other things are definitely going to be there.
Yes, sir.
And then what you're showing us today, is that like page 2 or 3 of the dashboard? I'm trying to visually see what we have. Does that
And I
make?
think part of it is the wireframe development of how it's going to look is forthcoming. To the
But-
point that you just made, when we affirmed indicators
Yeah.
back in December, and really stepped on the gas as a board, as a state, the process is, right, we'll develop each of these indicators out with the business rules, which is what we're talking about today, and then a wireframe will be developed as well in terms of what that visual looks like, and then we'll focus group that out with educators, parents, business and industry, so on and so forth.
And then when we finally get to the point that we look at accountability, what's the heart and soul of accountability, and then what's just indicators for information?
And there will be some.
Okay.
Right?
Because
Absolutely.
I don't want
Yeah,
the number of
absolutely, there
kids
will be.
taking advanced classes to weigh heavy in my school district with 72% free and reduced lunch, when I want kids to master skills in mathematics and language arts.
So I'm glad you brought this point up. So this is, as a state, I mean, we've been through a pretty expedited process in that we defined our characteristics, we affirmed our indicators. Now we're coming around where business rules will launch fall of 2022. And what we'll need to contemplate is, thematically, there are probably, when we think about early learning through like all of our indicators, there are probably 5 big goal themes, as an example, maybe more. But then what are those key goal themes that we want to set as the indicator goal for the state of Indiana? And then I think to what we've heard repeatedly, how might local communities even set their goal? If we set our target here, then how might we engage our local communities in setting that target? But to answer your question, which I think is important, all of these indicators will not be some massive equation that determines accountability. I mean, unless the board decides to do that, I could get overridden vote-wise, but that's not the intention. I think the whole intention is we're gonna come back as a board and define what are the key goal indicators to which, again, we'll set goals as a state, and then locals will also be encouraged to set those goals as well.
Okay, so we've approved what we did in October to start the framework.
Yes, sir.
And what you're presenting today, we're not taking any action on. But at some point in time, is this going to be an action item for us to have?
Yep, so we do not.
Part of the dashboard.
And this could be, I mean, an attorney could explain this, or I'll be glad to do my best. I'm very clearly not an attorney, I'm an educator. Confident in me, thank you. So what we're affirming today, or what we're reviewing today as a board, is just what will be displayed on a transparent dashboard. Here's the data indicators, here's how the data is gonna work. What we're looking at today does not set what Indiana's future accountability is. We will have to, as a board, open that rule as a board, if we so choose, which we likely will so choose, coming forward. Step 1 is getting all of our indicators. Iteration 1 launched September, and then we'll go from there. So a lot more discussion around that with not only State Board of Ed members, but stakeholders. We've really tried to, and so many people have been involved in this, but we've really tried to walk this forward, right? Step by step, keeping our eye on what's ahead, but also not zooming ahead too fast, but that's coming.
But we're gonna launch this in the blue in the fall.
We are going to
We'll have the
launch-
iLearn information, and
Yep.
that'll be part of what gets launched as the initial dashboard.
So anything that does not have an asterisk, we have the data for as a state. It might not come directly to the department today, but we're getting MOUs from all of our partner agencies to get that data. So anything that does not have an asterisk, we as a state will be launching in fall 2022 as iteration 1 of our Indiana GPS dashboard.
Okay?
We will have additional iterations where more data points will be coming. As an example, and I know this, I don't want to jump in front of your presentation, Ron, but as an example, another iteration that will happen is when we as a state consider how we might measure or review skills. It's probably not going to be select A, B, C, or D on a test, right? It's probably not what it's going to be. I could be wrong, but I'm doubting it. It's going to look a little different. But that would be a future iteration. And there are others that I could give as well that could be future iterations. But what Ron is doing today and what he shared with the K-8 business rule summary, those are 3 examples of data to which we do have, and we will display in some way on this dashboard. And this is how the data points will be displayed. But these 3 on K-8, and then the ones that Ron will hit on next, are are inclusive of also some additional ones that are not asterisks. You mentioned I-Learn assessment and growth, right? That's an example. There are other examples too. But that's where, again, general public, anyone can look at the links in this presentation to look at all of the different business data roles.
And my whole point is, I don't want us to have this long laundry list of things that everybody tries to check the box for that ends up being the total accountability rule, because that's what people are going to think. When I thought our premise for this whole thing was, number one, data and information and transparency. And at some point in time, with statutes the way they are, that we have the really totals of pass rates and growth and literacy for the state of Indiana kind of as the backbone still of accountability.
Some of the best conversation in our listening sessions, especially with external partners, has been the discussion around if we look at a variety of indicators that matter for kids, which we are as a board. We've said, right, here's what we're affirming. We want to see all these indicators. If a community can look at all of these indicators, that's where the discussion at the community level should really happen in terms of what's the push and pull to move literacy scores, to increase access to early learning, to increase access to CTE credentials of value at the high school level, right? That's the kind of conversation that it should generate. These indicators, again, will be on one place, not multiple different agency websites across the state in Excel spreadsheet form. It's going to be one place, and that will hopefully drive community conversation. But I do think that's a point that we're going to have to, everyone, we're going to have to continue to circle around. This is not a check the box exercise. This is really systematically thinking about what we can do to maximize learning and opportunities in our schools.
And then when we talk about local, you said, local indicators that people might want to have, whether it's, my EL population or whatever, are we building those indicators out and we select them to show on our dashboard, or
If I could pin that question, it's on the agenda a little bit later. That was one of the topics for this update. So if I could pin it, I'll come back to it. That
This
works?
is coming at you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very soon.
And one thing I'll flag real quick before Mr. Watts is on the right side, we have the availability column. That will give you a little sense, as Dr. Jenner's talking about future iterations. We've, like I said, literally put our stake in the ground. We've said fall 22, winter 22. And one of the great things about a Nimble dashboard is, unlike A to F, we don't have to wait until that one time in October where we run all the data and calculate. And these indicators are not dependent on each other from a reporting standpoint. So when we set a winter 2022 target, we could literally update this dashboard in winter of 2022. Whereas A to F, once you put A to F out for 2022, you may make a lot of changes, but nobody sees it until 2023. And so for folks who have questions about, well, when will we see that information, that column can help guide that exact discussion of the iterations of the dashboard. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was particularly relevant here. Mr. Watts, sorry. Dr. Jenner.
For me, the advanced coursework, I love the idea of access to it. And again, great work here. This is amazing. I will tell you, the stuff you've put together, we've talked about for a decade, and no one's done because it's really, really hard work. Everyone's always begged for multiple indicators. That's what we're working towards. So please don't take this as a critic. It's just what I don't want is us to inadvertently encourage students that shouldn't be taking ninth grade courses to be taking them. Because if the average 8th grade student can pass a 9th grade course, then it shouldn't be a 9th grade course. I don't want 8th grade to become high school and high school to become community college. That is not what we do. So when we talk about the number of 8th grade students who pass a high school credit bearing course, that does encourage us to put students in those courses that may not be ready for them. I want to know if 8th graders can do 8th grade work. So while I love the access to it, and I want those elite students to be able to have access to take those 9th grade courses, when we put it on here, it becomes important. So I would caution us on that, and I always say the same thing for high school students too. If an average high school kid can pass college courses, then college courses aren't hard enough. It should be the elite students that can pass those courses. But when we put it here, outside of it just being access to those courses, it becomes important.
And if I could, I think one of the opportunities, so we share the commitment to not repeating what California has already taught us, right? That review of national research is, how do we make sure that we build on the lessons, the easy way, right? We don't need to learn the same lessons the hard way. Because their intention out in California was aspirational, altruistic. They thought that was the right thing to do, don't get me wrong. I think one thing this dashboard does create the opportunity for, Mr. Watts, and encourage you to continue to push on this, is we can then run some data. Now that we have the information organized, we can run that data and we can see, okay, if we see increases in students enrolling in those courses, we can actually run the data and say, what do we know about those students? Are they struggling in all other aspects and being put in advanced coursework? Well, then that's something we might want to take a look at. Are they students who have historically passed iLearn or iStep for some of the students because they've been in school that long, but just haven't had access to that course? Some of the research has shown us that, I believe, Mr. Callahan can correct me later, but I think 57% of students nationwide have access to Algebra 1 in middle school. And so of those 43% that don't, are there any who are ready? So I think we're both committed. And
That's
I think
the exact question. That hits the nail on the head right there. And we have access and opportunity challenges in Indiana. We do. In our coursework at the middle school level, in terms of rigor, and at our coursework at the high school level. But we have taken it on as a board, as a team, as an opportunity to improve. And the other thing I wanted to mention, BJ, is if we look at any of these data points as standalone indicators, I think that's a threat. That's a disadvantage, because they all in some way can build upon. You look at literacy. Then you look back at access to early learning, right? You look at, it all can correlate potentially in some way, and we'll be seeking to do some of that. But I appreciate your point. That feedback that several people on the board had, that several of our external partners had, that is why that additional details was added. That was not on our initial draft of this presentation. We added that additional details because we want to be very, very mindful of that point. And again, the other guiding principle, Ron, that I don't know that you've mentioned today, maybe you have, is nimble. As we built this out as a state, we know that technology is changing fast, global economy, etc. We have to have a nimble dashboard that we can look at these data, determine if we need to pivot in any way or add.
Ron, I think I heard, so I want to be correct in this. So a comment came to mind. So I don't want to get us in the weeds, but I just want to make a comment for us to think about, right, or to contemplate. On advanced coursework, I thought I heard you say that you were really looking at that more broadly than just like an algebra or a biology, right? Because my issue becomes, I don't want that to become looked at as an elite student thing. One, I'm not sure what that is. But what about, I feel like there's some disjointedness here that I hope, and that's why I don't want us to get into weeds, but I want you to at least think about. I think there's some disjointedness in terms of where CTE falls into this right now with some of the new paths and things that have come in there. And I'm hoping at some point that's looked at to see where that fits, because having, and again, this is fresh in my mind because of some things I've been doing in the last couple of weeks. I've been in lots of our state's CTE programs in our area career centers, and that's a thing I keep hearing is where we start. We talk about getting students started in the middle school. We talk about getting the exploration stuff done earlier, but then some of our stuff doesn't exactly match So I think this goes to nimbleness. I think it goes to a lot of the things that you've said, transparency. But I think that advanced coursework, if we really want to walk the talk that we've been saying of we want to be career and college. I'm not sure I like that term anymore. I just want post-secondary success, right? Which is what then some of that advanced work may be CTE stuff at that level with kids. And again, I'm not suggesting that I'm right, wrong, or otherwise here, and I don't want to get philosophical, but I think we have to make sure that we look at those things as we go, right? With that.
And I think it absolutely could be CTE, and is in some cases, again, it's
what the student needs, right?
It varies, yeah.
It's what the student needs should be driving that, or wants, or what have you. So I just wanted to point, because as you said broaden out, then my mind went to, we need to make sure that everything we're doing matches falling into place here on that.
And without getting weedy, that is our goal. So to the extent that you don't feel the connections, we need to do the work, we need to do the thinking, we need to do the communication to make sure that it does fit. Because your assumption there, the connection of broad CTE, that should match, that is our goal. And so.
The only other thing that I do want to mention, and BJ, you, I think, have a thought as well, and I've shared this with quite a few folks in this room and at speaking events, probably the top 2 questions I'm getting right now in terms of K-12, top 2, have to do with literacy, no surprise, and educational attainment in our state. It's been a big headline over the past several months, and especially over the past several weeks, with Lilly's CEO coming out and talking about educational attainment. It's triggered a lot of other folks who are leaning in on this conversation. And I know as a board, we have leaned in, as a department, we have leaned in to determine how can we best set students up for maximum success, considering where we are as a state with educational attainment.
Is the attainment after K-12?
The educational attainment is post-high school diploma. So for a long time, people have thought college is defined only as 4-year degree, right? Bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctoral level. Educational attainment, and it really, when we think about it, when we define it nationwide, is a credential of value above high school. So it could be a CTE credential of value. It could be a technical certificate. It could be an associate degree. It could be, again, the path building up towards a future path that makes the most sense for that student. So Ron, on that note, BJ, did you want to add one other thing? Yep.
And I think that Katie and Byron both alluded to it, the access to having those CTE certificates, or the ability to go after that credential, is important. And I just want to plant the seed. My philosophy is not let's start it earlier. My philosophy is let's free some time up in high school by looking at the diploma requirements to allow those students to take those courses. Right now that doesn't exist. I think my vision is the exact same as yours. I'm just saying, I think more than one way to Brownstown is where I'm at.
Yes,
So
sir.
I think that we're heading I'm more in the same direction. It's just, I would rather free up time in high school for ninth graders to take those ninth grade courses than say, let's push them down to 8th grade, and then let's push college courses down into high school. Let's free up time to allow them, because like credentials, like I look at my region, Toyota needs 1,400 production workers. With those credentials would get you hired at $23, $24 an hour, which in Evansville, Indiana is great money. You're 18, you're 19 years old.
You always advertise for Evansville, Indiana.
Well, it's a good place to be. That's why I say that.
It's good. It is
But
a
I'm
great
saying
place to be, Evansville,
They don't
Indiana.
need 1,400 engineers. They need
Yeah.
1,400 production workers. That credential would get them to that. But right now, if you have one misstep in high school, you can't go do that. It's set. So I think, again, I'm just planting like Byron, I just want to plant that seed that the diploma requirements is tied to this work. It has to be. So I think that's something we're going to have to look at as a board eventually. Again, please, if I'm coming across as a critic, please know I am
You're not at all.
I mean, this is great work that we've begged for. This is my 20th year. We've been begging for this for 20 years. So thank you for working towards it.
I think the discussion today, it just triggers like
Yeah.
additional opportunity. But what you just said is local community focus needs, understanding that, understanding also your students,
Yep.
their aspirations, desires, and how might we build the best system possible to connect those two. The other thing I heard you say is flexibility. And also when we think about the possibilities ahead, I think we have to look at the high school space, like rethinking the high school space and potentially adding some flexibility. You mentioned diploma requirements. Again, that would take a board vote. In some cases, with some of the things, it might take a statute change. But nonetheless, flexibility for our schools so that we can best set up kids for success.
And I would say that we're not, or at least I'm not interested in changing the number of credits required to graduate. I'm more interested in changing the number of courses that are required to graduate in order to open up that junior and senior year to pursue those internship opportunities
Sure.
and things and quit having a 19th century education model in
And the
our schools.
flexibility too, with the work-based learning programs we've created to earn some credits actually doing that work, which is
Right.
what happens now.
Yeah.
And Ms. Moat has a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Really? Mrs. Moat, you can't chime in with this bunch?
So I have to laugh because I did use the standard virtual participant protocol of raising
You
my
raised your
hand.
hand?
So
Sorry
anyway.
about that. We've been all raising our hands in here, but I'm glad you texted someone and chiming in. The floor is yours.
Well, I promised to keep it brief, but I did just want to share what I love about where we are right now is that we are united in the significance of skills. Employability skills, and it has to be employability skills for an entire workforce. And I like that the data that we're going to gather is going to force us to confront some of our deeply held beliefs about how we do that. And students having access to all kinds of coursework that they need to participate in the workforce is something I'm very curious about. And I'm excited to review some of the data to help us step back and rethink how we do it. And again, appreciate the way that we are moving. And again, I like that altitude reference, but high at the level of vision, we need to make sure we're all thinking about employability skills in an aligned way, from DWD, how we think about CTE and the way that that can plug into credential attainment for students, and the way that higher education thinks about all of these things. Right now, I perceive we have misalignment around how we're defining skills, and this leadership by the department is going to force the kind of crosswalk and really getting tight and clear on that, because students need to have agency and be empowered to understand how to navigate it. We're far too dependent on others in the system to make sure that they understand exactly where to go. And so much of today's educational environment is highly student agency driven. So these tools that we're using are going to help us get there. And then I also love that we'll have these outcomes and clarity around outcomes that we seek, data to help us challenge whether or not our deeply held beliefs still serve us, and then alignment around then those core activities that we want to measure. So I really like where we're going. I think this is very strong work. It's hard because we are going to have to look at some of these deeply held beliefs, and then also affirming we're leading the way into how we make this work, to complement Dr. Jenner and many others of her team that were at the recent ASU GSV EdTech conference in California. Indiana was one of a handful of states that were giving presentations on this work to a national audience of ed tech investors and others that are seeking how to get the workforce they need. So just want to compliment that team in this work, because it truly is being lifted up as a way of figuring this out. So anyway, thanks for letting me share those observations. And I know Ron is anxious to get back to the presentation.
Thank you for using correct protocol and raising your hand. Ms. DeLosa, I'm going to watch for your hand if it comes up too from now on, okay? And by the way, I know we've talked about it multiple times, and I'm gonna pass it back to Ron, but this has been a total team effort. Many folks in the audience, many folks sitting at this board table, and many, many, many who are not here today who have been a part of building this for Indiana. And it is something special, and we're not gonna stop until it's right, which means we're never gonna stop. It's gonna continue having improvements. 9 through 12, business rules, let's talk about them.
Yeah, and so I'll highlight three quickly. Three that I think we've pulled out for their particular either nuance or shifts of past practice to make sure folks understand and are comfortable. So the first one is high school graduation on track. Not something the state has ever tracked and reported out. And this is really generated from conversations with stakeholders around two things. First, if we wait till graduation to know if they're on track, that's too late. And we know that school corporations across the state are monitoring and tracking this locally, don't get me wrong. But the state hasn't provided any type of expectation or information or standard definition of what on track is based on a deep analysis of the data. So that's number one. That's the first reason. The second reason we've highlighted this indicator and come up with this metric is because we have high schools that inherit by design students who are overage and underaccredited. And because our cohort-based graduation rate is calculated on a 4-year cohort, it really puts those students behind those schools in a tough position to either rapidly accelerate to try to meet that 4-year benchmark, or acknowledge that they're not going to graduate in the 4 years and be included in their grad rate, but keep them for a 5th or 6th year and graduate them appropriately, right? And so in order to make sure that we're providing both the data that's important and accommodating for those unique high schools and getting them, making sure their progress is transparently captured in the dashboard, we've defined this as credit accumulation within a given year. So not accumulation throughout the high school career, but did you earn the expected number of credits within a given school year? This will also include credits earned during summer school as long as they're earned during that school year. And we have the data, and if not, we'll include it on the subsequent year. And we're still working on defining expected number of credits. Somebody in the audience was on a recent stakeholder call, gave us some really good feedback as we continue to grapple with that, because we don't want it to be so broad, right? Any 10 credits, and I don't even know if it's 10, right? So please don't look into that. Because that really doesn't encourage this concept of indicators that push students towards employment, enlistment, enrollment, right? We know there are certain things students have to get in order to graduate and be prepared for life after high school. But we also don't want to be so restrictive that we put every single student on the same exact course track and course sequence, because that's the antithesis of what we're trying to do with GPS, which is really put students on individual pathways aligned to their aspirations and interests and skill sets. And so the feedback that we got was, think about maybe requiring core credits, but not necessarily outlining all the different core credits. And that gives high schools the flexibility that if a student falls behind or drops a math course, they might be able to take 2 the next year, right? But still be considered on track. So that's just an example of the types of decisions we need to make on this one indicator, but it will basically be number of students who earn the expected number of credits within a given year over the total number of students enrolled in that school. And this means that if a student doesn't reach it their 9th grade year, they don't have twice as much work to do their 10th grade year in order to be a positive case in this. And we think that's important because we know students that fall behind, it takes a lot of work to even just catch them up, and even more work to accelerate them, as we're learning very, very clearly now.
And we'll have to look at whether or not you're a trimester school district or if you're a semester school district as well, because of the number of differences we have across the state.
Yeah, we'll make sure that our definition accommodates for those differences, and we don't make any assumptions about the general applicability of some of the things that we think are true.
And that's where, as you can imagine, the math and all of these business rules, it becomes very tricky very quickly. However, as a board, as a state, we can't let the perfect get in the way of the good on this, right? We're gonna have to put our stake in the ground, try some things, and then be willing to be nimble enough to improve.
So the next one is college and career coursework, talking about nimbleness and continued improvement. This reflects very similar to the CCR metric, college and career readiness metric, currently included in the high school's A to F accountability grade. There is an important distinction that I want to make sure everyone understands and recognizes. The denominator for this indicator for the dashboard only, will include all 12th grade students, all students in the 12th grade cohort. Currently, the CCR metric only includes graduates. The reason for this is we want to make sure that we're reporting out, no matter whether the student graduates or not, which students are taking advanced coursework throughout their high school career. And going back to Dr. Ernest's comment earlier, we hope this includes the non-college track, right? The traditional definition of advanced courses of just AP, IB, but also includes those rigorous career-focused courses that lead to a credential of currency that are setting students up for a job with a living wage at 18, 19 years old. And so we will make sure that we continue to be nimble with this definition of advanced coursework. We're currently working with the current definition that has been used in CCR, but we'll continue to work on that definition of advanced coursework to ensure that we're bringing in, Mr. Watts, you've brought this up, so I'll say it here, the things that are accomplished for a apprenticeship, that if we can measure those things and capture that data, how do we then include those students as a positive case for this indicator?
Is that where micro-credentialing would come in as well?
Say more about, micro-credentialing is defined a lot of different ways, so say more about that, Pat.
So,
Like the journeyman's card, I'm sure is what you're referring to. So
Yeah.
if I'm working towards my journeyman's card as DOL Nationally Registered Apprenticeship, is there a way for us to figure out, okay, I'm not there yet,
Like
but
approaching.
I'm 90% there, how can we recognize, I didn't want to
yeah,
jump
no,
in
that's
there,
it.
but
I mean, we're working with
Yeah.
an
how can we
insurance.
recognize that before it's received?
Yeah.
We're moving them towards it, but
Yeah.
they don't have it yet.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, so as an example, just last week, we had, I think, the 6th school corporation launch, or locality launch a partnership with the Carpenters Union,
Yeah.
I-Corp.
awesome.
Yeah.
And those students, those juniors and seniors will gain a couple of credentials of value prior to high school graduation, and then have another apprenticeship opportunity, like continuation post. So what we've contemplated today, and this is where I think the build out, what does the future look like, this conversation right here, what we're talking about today is what would be captured in the data is the credentials they earned in 11th and 12th grade. What we may have to think about in a future iteration, especially as, I mean, apprenticeships are, let's be real, very, very new, modern youth apprenticeships in the high school space are still very, very new in Indiana and in our country, but we're interested in the possibilities there. So we might have to contemplate how we would put that on a dashboard, how that would look. But just so you know, for the iteration in launching fall of 2022, it would include, and CHER already publishes a similar data point to this when they look at approximately 64% of our students leave with AP or dual credit, and that could be, again, dual credit in from a CTE center, have Elkhart Career Center Cup, I just looked down and noticed, but it could be from a CTE center, or it could be from like a liberal arts option, English, communications. So that would all be contemplated, measured in this number. The post apprenticeship, we still need to think through how that might look. And probably before that, I'm gonna say it on record, and not that I've said it 1,000 times, we have to define work-based learning in the state of Indiana, what we're talking about. That's urgent. So, I have like a to-do list. Man, we have a lot of things we gotta do, you all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to do it. I'm just saying, I'm
Well, you're on the
glad
committee
that
now.
I'm glad
I signed
that
you
we're
up.
working towards it. I'm glad that that's at least, we want to recognize that equally with those AP and IB courses, so,
Add BJ to
point
committee.
well taken.
And I'm glad BJ's on that committee. Because once again, we're trying to work with some industries that are in our township, and one of them is an insurance association that want to micro-credential our kids. And if they stick with it, they get a job once they graduate, but they won't actually get the full certification until after they've left us.
Yeah.
So as they take these courses and now they know about property and casualty, they know about risk insurance, they know about health insurance, they're gonna get a micro credential that
Yeah.
says you've accomplished something and you are proficient in this industry, in this category.
Yeah.
And whether or not we can figure out a way to capture that so we actually have some career things there other than just kind of what's considered a traditional college
Yeah.
course, I
That's
guess.
interesting.
Yeah. And I
Like
think,
almost like an approaching,
Yeah.
yeah.
which I think is when you first asked about micro-credentials, I think you've effectively distinguished the micro-credentials, I think, as we talked about them, which are skill-based micro-credentials. You have communication skills. You're really talking about career-focused
Yeah.
micro-credentials that go beyond skills to the practical knowledge for that industry.
Yeah, and that was their term of a micro credential.
Yeah, of course, yeah, and that's why I think Dr. Jenner
Yeah.
asked the question, because,
And I don't know if those exist outside of maybe that world.
Exactly.
So that's what we're going to have to
Gotta figure
build
it
for. If I'm working on one for manufacturing or healthcare, I may not have my CMA, but how close to it am I? And can we say, this is acceptable to say, you're on track,
Yeah.
basically, that you, like before, we're on track to get there.
You know, it's interesting, we pull, you think about crossing the finish line initiative, where I briefed you a couple months back, we had just from Ivy Tech and Vincennes alone, over 17,000 students who are eligible, who are within just a few courses of completion. And many of them, what we're finding is many of them don't even know that their educational attainment could immediately go up upon completion. And so that's what I hear you say. So we already get that data. We just, again, I mean, this is yet another iteration that we're gonna think about how we might capture it and what data points of value for communities do we need to make sure are on here?
yeah. And a quick point of personal privilege on the longitudinal outcome data will help ensure that if that student earns that credential after they leave the high school and are employed, the high school, right, that community is capturing that data, that student's data. And that can really fuel a conversation of progress is happening. Some students don't get to the terminal credential by the time they graduate, but look how many are employed 3 years out. We can now map that at some point, they're getting it. And that's why I think those longitudinals, I understand there's different thoughts about them for a lot of valid reasons, I think, but connecting those dots can really ensure that those students don't drop off. You led them all the way there, but they have that one more year, right, before they actually complete, and so they don't drop off. So it'll just give us that information to have that conversation, I hope. So finally, strength of diploma. This one's interesting because we took a little bit of a different approach. Dr. Jenner really leaned in on this one. We currently, in our ESSA model, calculate a number for this indicator. And upon reflection, we asked ourselves, how transparent is that number to the average person, the average consumer, the average parent, average community member? Do they even know what diplomas we offer, let alone how a number is representative of which diploma students are earning? We actually concluded that the benefit of a number is more about comparison. I don't know what 76 means, but I know it's more than 74, so I must be doing better. And that wasn't really the tone and tenor that we're trying to prioritize with the design of the dashboard. So we've actually taken a different approach for strength of diploma. Rather than taking it and putting it into an aggregate number, we're just going to report out the number and percentage of students within the graduating cohort, which diploma types they're earning. That data will then be disaggregable, obviously, to promote conversations about the types of diploma students are earning and the types of outcomes that that's leading to. So this, unlike the others, which is a calculation, this is merely data visualized in a digestible and understandable format. The easiest, and I don't know if it'll be a pie chart, but the easiest comparison, we used to do this on Compass for grad rate. Yeah, it's one of the things that everybody loved about Compass is you just, boom, yeah, and everybody misses.
Bring it back.
So we're gonna bring that feature back. And I think it's a great example, and I'm not lying, right? Dr. Jenner in the meeting said, like, why are we doing it this way? Can we do it these other ways? And I think it's such a great example of how we are grounding our decisions and our principles, taking the stakeholder feedback. This concept of competition and comparison I don't think is unavoidable, but what we heard from our stakeholders is let's make sure we're not promoting it unintentionally. And I think this is a great example of how we're trying to do that, to not contribute to competition that is unhelpful with a number that really nobody understands. So wanted to flag that for everyone as well, because it's a little bit different than we've been doing it with the SM model. And so as Dr. Jenner mentioned, there are links in the presentation that are publicly available that allow you to download the full list of indicators and business rules. We highlighted the 6 today because we think those are the 6 that kind of are the newest, the most significant, required some explanation. If you have questions about others, obviously don't hesitate to reach out to the department. And again, those empty boxes that say in development, you can track those right back to those aspirational indicators, and you can actually see on the table the stake that we have put in the ground for when we expect to have those data available and publicly posted on the dashboard. So I have a couple more slides to go through, but I will go through them quick. The department is not, as I mentioned, the aspirational indicators, we're not just hoping that we meet those deadlines. We are actively structuring our work so that we are learning lessons by supporting and collaborating with our schools. We are implementing, and I'll go to 2 programs, but multiple programs, and as we do, we're partnering with a research firm to come alongside and pull takeaways and lessons learned as we partner with our school districts to help inform how we elevate and measure certain indicators statewide. Aligning the projects and programs that we're launching at the department to GPS, creating that cohesive approach, is how we're able to do this. So the first example, briefly, is our 3E grant, Explore, Engage, Experience, which is basically the trajectory of student career development from the early to the middle to the high school. Explore, Engage, Experience. And through this work, we are going to partner with the grant recipients, it's a grant, to actually build out a definition of work-based learning in the state of Indiana. Dr. Jenner also often talks about this will likely be a tiered definition, right? So there's different levels of work-based learning. By tiering them, we can then collect data on them. And by collecting data on them, we can then report out on them. And that's how we will achieve an indicator for work-based learning, which is listed as an aspirational indicator. We really want to encourage this. And going back to the conversation earlier, for all students. For all students. Work-based learning is not necessarily a CTE endeavor. If a student aspires to be an attorney, and they're on a pathway that's, past the SAT and graduate and go to a 4-year college, they should have an opportunity, a structured opportunity, to have work-based learning in that field. Because that's going to connect them to that pathway in a way that's going to allow them to persist, right? And ensure that they stick with it, because there will be challenges along the way. The second program, I think Dr. Jenner actually mentioned this one earlier, is the micro-credential pilot program. And to distinguish this from the conversation earlier, micro-credentials, these are the micro-credentials for the skills, our employability standards. Specifically, the program prioritizes the 3 listed in GPS: communication, collaboration, and work ethic. We know that there are others, but we got to start small, right? We can't boil the ocean, as Dr. Jenner often says. So we are partnering with local school corporations, right? This is a grant program to build out curriculum, assessments, and then feedback structures to kids that will allow us to measure mastery on our employability standards. We don't expect all schools to do it exactly the same. That's why we're partnering with multiple schools. Our goal at the state is to create a data reporting infrastructure that allows schools to report to us their information about student mastery of these employability standards. But at the end of the day, our goal is really just to support and stand up effective ways of doing this. So that everybody has the support they need in order to have a rigorous approach to teaching students these, helping students practice them, and then evaluating them. And again, we don't expect the evaluation to be a written test, right? We want to see this be project-based and other types of portfolio or innovative assessment approaches that allow us to truly measure. And even if they're validated by third party, that's even better, right? To truly measure the mastery of these skills beyond just a written test. So these programs are grants that are supporting schools to do this work, and we are coming alongside and saying, what can we learn from you? We're doing this alongside our Hoosier educators, our families, our communities, and our schools. And so lastly, we'll get into next steps. Local indicators is the other piece on the spring update. If you go back to the December presentation we gave, that we were expected to provide an update for this month. We are committed to continuing to build out local indicators. I pinned your question earlier, Pat. The vision here is to identify a subset of indicators, widgets, if you will, that can be plugged into the dashboard so they live alongside the other GPS indicators. There is no law preventing a school corporation from creating their own dashboard yesterday, today, tomorrow. The challenge is capacity, right? What to measure, why to measure it, and how to do it. And so we hope to build a set of local indicators that folks can select to have illustrated at some fashion on their dashboard. I'm going to be clear, we're never going to get everybody's desired local indicator, right? We do not have the capacity to develop a metric for every single local indicator, but we are committed to creating a pool, if you will, and allowing that to live right alongside on the state's dashboard versus having to go somewhere else, right? The whole point of this entire project is to bring data and information together. And then this is our spring update, which leads to the fall of 2022, which my tone changes and I start to hold my breath and continue talking without breathing when I say we're going to launch a GPS dashboard in September. And I kid, we are confident. We have great support at the department, incredibly thoughtful leaders from top to bottom, as well as administrative support from outside agencies around project, or outside organizations around project management and ensuring that we are executing on the timeline that is necessary for us to achieve these results. So with that, I know we've had a lot of discussion, but I'll pause there. That it concludes my update for today.
So our goal will be to come back. We will come back September board meeting and showcase Indiana GPS.
I would say really, really, really good work. This is something you should be proud of. I mean, this is hard. This is something
Let's see it first.
we've been begging.
No, I'm kidding.
It's
We're
gonna be
gonna be,
perfect.
we're gonna
It's
be.
not, but the
We're
great thing
gonna
about
be.
it is
Yeah.
it's amendable.
Yes, it is.
But it's really hard work, which is why it hadn't been done. So all the things of how do we measure that? You know, with the micro-credentials that you're working on now, like I love that you put a metric to communication. This is how we're going to say, can a student communicate effectively in the workplace? So really, really, really good work. This is something that the teachers have been begging for a long time, and we're going to get it right. So good job. I know you don't hear that very often, but very, very, very good job.
No, and if I could, you know, I thought about this earlier, but I saved it till the end. Feedback sounds like critiques for people who aren't open,
Okay, good.
right?
Good.
And so I want to be very clear. We are open to any and all feedback. We had great conversations with, as I mentioned, the organizations that are represented here and others, and they don't agree with everything that we're doing. But every conversation we have is productive, right? Because both parties understand and we're all open to the conversation, and we know that we can learn together, and that's what true collaboration and feedback looks like. And so I'll just reiterate, feedback sounds like a critique when you're not open, and so you have nothing to worry about, that your comments and feedback for us today sound like a critique of the work by any means, because we absolutely value it and need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate your time and all your work, your team's work on moving that forward. This time I'll have Carrie Polk Carrie Polk Meek come up.
The president, meek like the meek shall inherit the earth.
Yes, yes. She is our Director of Teaching and Learning. And I always say this, she's also Indiana's current Principal of the Year. We recruited her prior to her being named, as Todd Bess is exiting. We stole her, Carrie, to serve the state and all of its students, and we're so glad to have her. And she's going to provide the update on the Indiana Standards and Essential Need of Support.
I am, so I'm very glad to be here, and I will synthesize the information and then take any questions that you might have. So let me make sure I know how to, there we go. Just very briefly, we were charged with taking those standards that in 2019, we started the process of calling them priority or prioritizing standards. And we were asked then to take those priority standards starting in 2019. We aligned them to those I Learn blueprints. And so the conversation for our team became, now what? Given what we know about I Learn, given what we know about academic progress, given what we know about disruptions due to COVID. And so very much this process became a model for what we hope school districts will do in the future using prioritized standards that are aligned to the iLearn blueprint and based on individual iLearn results. So one piece of that is us modeling for schools how we would think about the results of iLearn, and then the ways in which they can provide focused support. So it's really important as you're thinking about these standards in essential need of support to know a couple of things. And that there's a theme about how wonderful the team is. So I will say in advance that, again, what a team effort across assessment and academics in general. But we have already released to the field all of the supports that they would need, including videos that show them how to think about creating or using standards in essential need of support, including parent supports as well. So here is what I really want to just say and make sure I emphasize here. There may be academic standards on these standards in essential need of support that are high priority, meaning when you're thinking about high priority, how we've talked about priority standards in the past, but are not necessarily represented as standards in essential need of support because they weren't noted as being behind for students taking iLearn, right? So and that I saw a little bit of a wait a minute, because when we're thinking about how we're having this conversation, this is a very new way of thinking about standards and asking educators to think about priority standards, the iLearn blueprints, and then having a conversation about their students' performances on iLearn. So that's one piece of, that I wanted to note here. There may be other academic standards where students are performing poorly, but they're not prioritized standards. So they would not necessarily be noted on standards in essential need of support.
So what you're saying, I'll say it back to you really quick, is
Perfect.
standards and essential need of support is the urgency of our short-term impact due to pandemic-related learning setbacks.
Yep.
We also have, and I want this to not be confused, we also have a parallel movement with standards. It was passed in statute, or put in statute this year. We are supportive of it as a department and are leaning in. And that is to take all of our standards and streamline them. Streamline them and decrease the number of standards to the most important. We've heard that from teachers, we've heard that from principals. Let's not have 1,000, let's not 1,000, but you know what I mean, not have this many, let's really get focused. So I wanted to point out that I don't want anyone to be confused. These are two separate. What you're hearing about today is the urgency of the now. And we're also, again, running that linear strategy of streamlining all standards, again, in partnership with teachers, parents, et cetera.
And I appreciate that distinction too. So the thing that when I'm thinking about, like, if we wanted to talk about the field and how the field might use this, while we as a department are very conscious and very thoughtful as we were going through this process about those standards in which our Hoosier students needed additional support, the priority then is to model this again for individual schools and school districts that need to think about the way that they're looking at their data. Thinking about things relative to, was it a teaching gap or was it a learning gap? Was this a moment where we need to prioritize remediation for such a large group of kiddos that we need to think about the way we're teaching our current maps, however that particular district or that school chooses to do it? And so we were very intent on that process. So I'm going to go a little bit in the weeds, and then if you're like, oh, that's enough, then you can just say.
You're going to pull out of the weeds eventually.
Eventually, we're going to come out of the weeds.
All right, got
because I wanted you to understand a little bit about how we thought about this. So as I mentioned, the priority standards that existed in 2019, very much then those committees, those groups of educators across the state of Indiana, as they were creating those priority standards, very much are reflected on those iLearn designs, like how we're mapping and how we're thinking about that. So we very much started there. And then when we were then going from that place, we made the decision to think about things relative to priority, meaning how they were prioritized by educators in the past and how then they came out in the state of Indiana connected to iLearn results. So we went through that entire process, and then eventually what we did is we met with committee members. So we brought, experts from across the state of Indiana, educators, and we asked them to think about those standards that were identified based on that process. So they were priority standards, they were on the iLearn blueprint, this is how the results came out for the state of Indiana on iLearn, and then we said, does this make sense? Do we understand what the content priorities are? And are there any standards that we didn't identify that you think need to be there? And those groups met, and the very first,
Hey, pause really quick.
of course,
We have a couple board members who have a 10:30 commitment.
Yeah.
But they are also board members who have really wanted to see some of this work.
Yay.
So I'll
Yeah.
give them an opportunity to respond, and then I know you have to exit.
of course.
This is great work. I mean, we've been looking for this for a long time.
Oh,
Because
thank
we
you.
take all these assessments and where's it tied back into our instruction? And the field will benefit because of the work that's done here. Unfortunately, in the middle of it, we got a new statute that's gonna make us do some other work, but it will still be the framework of what will continue, because even with less standards, we still need this kind of information for our teachers in order to serve our kids. So this is perfect stuff.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it.
Ditto.
need to
I mean,
go.
this truly brings it back to relevance, and this, you develop it one bite at a time. I mean, you've said, okay, this is where we're gonna start, this is takes us from a shotgun approach to a rifle approach to make the impact as quickly as possible, so.
Perfect.
And
Love
feeds
this.
in great to GPS and dashboard. I
Yeah.
mean, if we're gonna raise anything in that, we have to have this.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I love that when we release these in April, we also, again, simultaneously release the videos, the resources, everything that educators and parents would need to know to understand, which made my whole heart feel good. Because we're not just saying this is what we did. We're saying this is how we did it, and here's a model for you to do it in the future. And then we're committed to releasing these again after we get current iLearn results.
perfect.
And tying those assessments back to something of value is important, because there are folks that think,
Yeah.
man, I take this test, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do with it, what I'm gonna use it for. This shows the importance of those and how we're using those to make things better for kids.
Perfect. And as somebody that just left the field, I got so excited just thinking about a principal sitting in my team meetings,
Yeah.
thinking about data this way. So I'm glad.
Thank you for pausing. Thank you for
course.
being
Yeah,
here.
sorry.
Thank you.
Keep going, Carrie.
Yeah, and so I think really just that initial publication has occurred in April of 2022. So as I'm standing here, this has already been released to the field. And then we will continue to update these annually as new iLearn results come in. We've been very, very conscious and very, very thoughtful about using that terminology of standards and essential need of support and not saying things like priority standards. So the message to the field isn't that we've reprioritized standards. The message is based on the priority standards that exist, based on current results from iLearn, these are some standards that need some extra attention, and then encouraging individual schools and districts to do that for their own results. That's it.
I didn't realize you were that close to the end, or I would have had them wait.
It's okay.
Sorry about that, Carrie. But I do want to open it up to any other board members who have thoughts, comments, questions for Carrie. And I'm watching for hands on the screen.
No hands.
No hands.
Perfect. Thank you so
All right,
much.
Seeing none, thank you, Carrie, for that presentation. I do think, on the point about the statute that was passed, I really think we can use that to our benefit as a state. I mean, again, I think that these run concurrently, what that statute will do, again, is streamline the standards. What this does is, it provides basically a proactive response to the current standards, the current assessment we have. So, really appreciate, again, all of your work and all the educators who have leaned in with us and identified our standards in essential need of support in Indiana. On that note, I want to make sure. On that note, I thought I had one more note and it's gone. So that means, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion. We now have a second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much for joining us on the call and those who are listening in today.